Welcome to the Technical Documentation Podcast, the podcast dedicated to highlighting the importance of technical documentation in the corporate world and exploring the challenges and pain points that come with it. I am Sunita Giri, and in this series, we will dive into why documentation is crucial for businesses, how to tackle common issues, and share best practices to enhance the documentation processes in the corporate sphere or in any organizational documentation aspects. So, in this first episode, I want to kick things off by talking about documentation awareness and setting the stage for what is coming up. Documentation might not be the most glamorous topic, but it is essential part of any business's operation, ensuring consistency, clarity, and continuity. To help us discover deeper into the importance of documentation in the companies, I have a special guest with me today. He is having 20 plus years of industry experience in the field of technical documentation. He has experience working with startups as well as served as Director of Product Documentation, a well-known face in the technical writing world. After his stint with multiple companies to help the technical writing community, he started Tech Writers Tribe, a platform for technical writers. He is the founder and director of Tech Writers Tribe. Please welcome Mr. Punit Shrivastava. Thank you, Punit, for joining us in this podcast.
Thank you, Sunita, so much for having me, and I feel privileged to be part of your podcast. Thank you.
Thank you, Punit. So, Punit, let's start with a fundamental question. Why do you believe documentation is important in the corporate world or to all other companies? Over to you, Punit.
It's a very fundamental and popular question, I will say, because everyone keeps thinking about it and we hear a lot about it. So primarily, instead of talking about technical documentation, let's think about what does a company, whether a corporate or startup or any kind of company, what do they want? They want to grow. Grow with what? With their product. So they put a lot of effort in developing a product. But just by developing a product, they don't grow. It comes to product experience. Product experience is not something which they can control directly. Product experience is directly related to how the users of the product feel about it. Yes, some companies have really good product. Users feel very excited, they buy it. What happens when they start using it? They need some hand-holding. They need some onboarding training. They need some support when they are using the product. Wherever they feel a glitch and they have to make efforts in using that product, they feel bad about the product. They start to think bad about the company, that okay, the company has provided a product, but it hasn't provided us any support. As a result, if we say that unless they have good product experience, just having a good product never works for a company. So this is the fundamental reason why any company needs to focus on technical documentation. The product experience is provided with multiple components. First, it comes with a good product, a good UI design, then a good support system. Ultimately, it boils down to technical documentation, so that right from onboarding, then to using the product, whenever they face any challenge, they can get back to the handy technical documentation, and without impacting their work, they can get along with the product. This product experience, if a company is, that user becomes an unpaid loyal ambassador. That's what companies need, isn't it? So this is where
Absolutely.
technical documentation becomes very important for them.
Yeah. Thank you, Punit, for enhancing the importance of documentation. Absolutely true. For users' experience, it is very much important to have proper documentation for a product. So it leads me to next question, Punit. How does technical documentation help a company who is building the product?
Right.
Over to you, Punit. Yeah.
Right. So yeah, companies need technical documentation, but yeah, any set of content cannot be called as a helpful technical documentation. So technical documentation teams have a very important role of providing a set of documents in a way where the users can feel happy at every stage. Now, when we take about every stage, let's talk about every stage of the user's experience with the product. First of all, a company or a user, they want to buy a product. We all know, and I'm not the first person to say that marketing content, marketing collateral, presentations, they at times do not present the real picture of the product. As a result, nowadays companies have got smarter. When making a decision to buy a product, they ask, where is your technical documentation? They take the link, they take the document, they read the document first to understand how exactly this product behaves. Does it behave the way I want? Once they are satisfied, the first stage is clear, they make a decision to buy the product. They have bought it. Now comes the second stage, onboarding. Onboarding should be very smooth. We all know that. Now for that onboarding, if we have adequate document that helps users in understanding the product and using the product, and in case they come across some issues, then troubleshooting those issues. If we have a proper set of document that technical documentation team has provided, that onboarding becomes very smooth. So onboarding also goes smooth, and then comes the continuous use of the product. While using, they may need different kind of documents. They may need videos also. They may need different guides. They may need different kind of knowledge-based articles. All these things, the technical documentation team envisions it in advance and provides with the product. So there are multiple ways where right from decision to buy a product till using the product, technical documentation team is able to help the company.
Thank you, Punit. So useful these tips are. So companies definitely thinking about these documentations while buying the product, but if not, then please listen to Punit's comments and look for a technical document before buying the product. It will help you to onboard the product. Thank you.
May I add one point here, since you said, and that reminded me. Companies looking for documentation. I have seen it during my work stint, and especially you will also notice this trend. Do you notice many companies, especially startups, initially they just focus on building a product. Then suddenly they realize that okay, their market size is increasing. Now their clients are kind of global, and then they come to documentation teams. They want to form a documentation team to have the document, and they will say that okay, we have the product for some time now, but we don't have document. So we should ask ourselves, why do they come at that stage? They come at that stage because with local customers it's fine, but when it comes to global customers, the customers ask, where is your technical documentation? Unless you show me that, I'm not going to buy your product.
True. Absolutely true. Thank you, Punit. So Punit, we talked about companies, we talk about the requirements of documents. But the team who work for this technical documentation, uh, what are some common challenges team face when it comes to documentation in these corporate settings or in these companies? Can you please highlight some points on that? Yeah, over
Sure.
to you.
So, talking about challenges when we go to LinkedIn, when we go to different forums of technical writers, I think we see such a huge list of challenges that it looks like the world of technical documentation is full of challenges.
Yes.
So, yep, there are many challenges which technical documentation teams face. Primarily, it boils down to the term called ecosystem. A company has an ecosystem for its project, for its different teams. Unfortunately, only some companies have a good ecosystem for technical documentation teams. And needless to say, those companies have very good documentation set, and those companies have very loyal customers also. The product experience is really good. But in other companies, what's the challenge that documentation teams are facing? Let's start again from the basics. Say, for example, a technical writer joins a company. First thing first, we often see when a developer joins a company, when a product manager joins a company, their good time is spent initially on training, product training. How many times in which companies have we heard about such instances where 15 days or 30 days of technical writers go on product training? It's ironic that the technical writer is supposed to write about that product only. But the company feels that, okay, they don't need that kind of training. In fact, probably from the second week, most of the technical writers start working on project. So lack of training is major challenge. This leads to second point, that is low priority. Mostly the management doesn't give much focus on it. As a result, the whole organization and different teams feel that technical documentation is a low priority task. This again results from the ecosystem, because there is no focus on training. Then again, okay, technical documentation is something that can be done at the last stage. That's why low priority. And as a result, they don't engage. They means other team members from development, product management. We will always keep hearing about, hey, we don't have time. We are busy with something. So this comes out because there is this mindset of low priority. As a result, this leads to the third point, the collaboration. Collaboration with teams becomes very difficult because they don't feel it's very important. As a result, they don't provide time. As a result, it becomes a major challenge for a technical writer to collaborate, asking for meeting time, requesting for input. All this becomes a challenge. So this all should be part of the ecosystem, and this should be first driven by the leadership. Like in every other context of life, here also first leadership needs to act, then everything else will fall into place. And if leadership falls into place for this particular reason, the ecosystem is there, then that will solve another big challenge that technical documentation teams face. And that is the focus on standardization and investment. Because there is less focus, even if technical documentation teams asks for resources, for tools, everything costs money. And adding one resource, buying one tool, convincing the management becomes very tough. But at the same time, they demand world-class documentation.
Yes.
So with lesser number of resources compared to other teams, they want world-class documentation. But at the same time, they tie your hand by not providing tools also, because those are expensive. So In general, I will again sum it up. This overall ecosystem is lacking, where the management should take up the ownership, push it to the teams that documentation is important. It's not an additional work, it's an important task in the part of project life cycle, and everybody has a role to play.
Yes, thank you so much, Punit. Yeah, it is very helpful. So, Punit, like we understood that how organization could be the major part in improvising the documentation. But it is again taking me to my next question. How organization encourages better documentation practice among their teams? So can you please highlight few points on this?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because this will help me elaborate. If an organization is struggling, with this, then probably they can make a note of these. First of all, like we talked about ecosystem, if something needs to have this kind of ecosystem, the first thing they need is create a culture of documentation. This culture of documentation is not for technical documentation teams, but for other teams. They should realize that for the product that the company has, good document is required, and their input, their collaboration is very important. Just because you have technical documentation team, you cannot expect them to sit and do each and everything. Especially in bigger organizations, the products are huge. The products are not simply limited to one small product. Those products are basically a solution. So in such circumstances, others also need to collaborate. So this culture of documentation should be there. Then make documentation part of your overall project workflow. For example, in software companies, we see Agile is being followed as a project methodology. Then there are different kind of tools being used for project management, bug management. But most of the companies still think that those tools are primarily for developers. The tasks are there for developers. Actually, what will happen to documentation team then? How will they work? So this project workflow should include documentation also. So that's when it becomes part of that project workflow, where very small things, for example, that input is not coming from the developers. Yes, point noted, they are very busy. But then the second important point is documentation is also mandatory.
Yeah.
Companies won't send product without documentation. So this documentation can be prepared only with the help of developers, product managers, technically the SMEs. If it is part of overall project workflow, the developer task should not be allowed to be closed unless the related documentation task is complete. It automatically forces the developers or the SMEs related to that task to provide input. They cannot close it. So this project workflow, that's the second point. Then we already talked about the resources. Provide the resources to the documentation team. If you have say 40 developers for one project, you cannot have just one technical writers. Think about it. You have 40 developers because it is a huge product.
Yeah.
And in that also, none of the developers know about the whole product. Every developer knows about their specific phase, one feature, two features, something like that. How do you expect one technical writer who is not at all technical to know about the whole product? So think about it. Resources is required. And of course, when you say world-class documentation can be prepared using Notepad also. That's what we used to do in, long back, maybe 30 years back. Then came say MS Word or some other tools. But from MS Word, if you want them to provide world-class documentation with good design, all different kind of facilities, HTML pages, using artificial intelligence and all, that cannot be done. So understand, if you want world-class documentation, you need to provide world-class tools also. And lastly, I will again emphasize, when when your leadership is good, all this falls in place. So companies should look what they should do from a leadership perspective to build a strong documentation environment.
Thank you so much, Puneet. Such an useful tips for creating an ecosystem in our organization where everyone can focus on their own areas and it can be a better place to work. Thank you. So, Puneet, one last question I would like to ask. Uh, you have worked with so many technical writers, whether they are new, experienced, or leaders in their fields. So, what are the common obstacles they face in the corporate world and in any companies? And what key things should they focus on to improve documentation and make their jobs easier? So,
Okay.
um,
So let's divide this question into two parts. First is the what are the common obstacles faced by the technical documentation teams. So the common obstacles, some of them have created the contributed to memes also. The most important is the SME challenge. Okay. Now this SME challenge leads to lack, technically results into lack of access to the subject matter experts. We talked about before also how they, most of the time people say that, okay, it's very difficult to set up a meeting with an SME. So without direct access to SMEs, technical writers may struggle. They cannot provide detailed and accurate information. What will be the result? Even if the company wants to get documentation without providing that access to SMEs, then it will lead to incomplete documentation. At times it may be inaccurate also, because you are forcing the technical writers to finish the documentation. So yes, this SME challenge is the biggest challenge, and we all know, whether it is India or abroad, even the senior most technical writers globally talk openly about the SME challenge. Second point, the biggest obstacle I will say for one big obstacle I will say for technical writers in general is technical knowledge. Because their focus is more onto writing, they may not have technical expertise. Yes, unless there is the background of engineering and all, that technical expertise may provide a big obstacle in understanding the product. Yes, technical writers come from different fields, different domains, and then they develop this expertise. So this period which is taken in developing this expertise basically hinders the documentation efforts also. Other challenge we already talked about, lack of tools and resources, how it impacts. You're not given a good tool, but you are having the given the expectation of providing the best output. How do you provide the best output? So that is one challenge. And even technical documentation managers, if they have to put one request of a tool, I mean, ask any documentation manager, they will tell how much pain it is, okay, to get approval for one tool. In the same way, the other challenge is lesser number of resources, because if it's a very simple maths here, if 5 persons are working on 5 different features, that's still fine. But if one person is working on 3 features, then try to understand the challenge. At the same time, developers, QAs, product managers, they have a specific focus. So as a result, if technical writers are forced to work with lesser number of resources, they have to juggle around a lot. Attending 5 sprint calls a day and all, they have to juggle around. And we all know, if somebody is juggling around too much, what happens? You cannot focus on one thing properly. You cannot gain proper knowledge about that. You cannot dedicate proper time. Your work is always a work of hurry. So that's another challenge of balancing multiple projects. And the last thing, although there is a huge list, the last thing, so much work the technical writers are doing, They are also spending the same or more number of hours on a project like anyone else does. What happens when it comes to appreciation? Forget about appreciation. Many times we hear that after a project release, generally the teams go out for a small outing. It can be just a basic lunch. And many times we hear that technical writers do not get invitation for those lunch. The team should know why, because the technical writer also worked on that project. This is about that basic invite. And then comes the appreciation, the bigger appreciations that, the the performer of the project or some project. How many times a technical writer has got it? Yes, as a result, documentation team makes its own effort of keeping them happy. They award it to their team members. But from a project's perspective, so this lack of appreciation kills anyone. Even the best talent can have low morale if they don't get that. So these are some main challenges. Of course, there are many more, but these are some main challenges. So that's the answer to your common obstacles part. Now, related to that, what should actually technical writers do to improve? We will not, let's talk about the contemporary thing. Contemporary things are like for any kind of documentation, you should know your audience, you should understand the product, you should have a good style guide to follow, the basic technical writing skills. Those I will consider in today's world when we are talking in 2024 impacted by AI and all. Those are now the basic things. Okay. We should now focus on other things. What should we do? And this is very important because first, to get appreciation and recognized, we also need to reach that level. If we are doing basic things, we cannot say people should respect us. Do things where people are forced to respect you. So for example, in technical documentation, apart from the historical way of providing content, first of all, find out unique ways of providing content. And unique ways means such methods which can help the users better. Just don't be limited to content. Get into video documentation. Just when you are doing the research, don't consider research is a basic thing. Research is a big thing. Try to have data analytics skill in you. Okay, that's number two, that skill development. When you are trying to understand the product, try to think like a product manager. Just by saying that we do the work of product manager is not enough. Your understanding should be like that. So that kind of skill set should be developed. Plus AI, artificial intelligence, if we talk about, it's not an enemy. Artificial intelligence and bots are our friends. Try to gain expertise so that you know how to utilize it in the best possible way to enhance documentation in such a way that helps the customers more. Be more feedback oriented also. Be open to feedback. And when we talk about AI, we can summarize that, okay, be open to the trends. We are living in golden time where there are so many trends coming, and as a result, technical documentation is also expanding. Think about a situation where we were just doing user manuals, online help. Then slowly you started doing UI message review also. Then next stage, we got many more documents in our hand which were earlier in the hands of product managers and developers. For example, developer documentation. Most of the companies are looking out for technical writers who can do developer documentation and API documentation. It was never in our hand. Now it is. Very small thing. Now it appears very small, right? Release notes. But all of us know earlier it was the product managers or the business analysts, they used to do that. Now it has become an important component for a technical writer's role also. So in the same way, the scope of technical writing is increasing a lot. All we need to do is catch up with the trends and be prepared in advance. And don't just rely on these things that, okay, we have good control over English. We know what is technical writing. The basics are fine. No, those are good to start. But further, to grow in this career and also to gain from organization that kind of ecosystem, we also need to be ready to deliver. So yes, there is some onus on us also.
Yes, absolutely. Totally agree, Puneet. Thank you so much for sharing your insights, Puneet. Now we all know what are the challenges technical writers are facing. Sometimes we are not even aware the pain areas and hence we won't voice it. Moreover, we have also understood so clearly the focus area to improve ourselves to become good or better version of technical writers and make our impact more meaningful in the sectors. Thank you, Puneet, for also sharing that how the clear documentation, effective documentation is critical for success in any businesses. Thank you so much, Puneet, once again. So as we move forward in this series, we will exploring the impact of documentation on different aspects of corporate work or other companies and life. We will also be discussing the challenges faced by technical writers and how they overcome them. Each episode will feature practical tips, expert interviews, and real world examples to help enhance your documentation skills. Thank you for joining me on this journey to make documentation more integral and efficient part of our corporate world. Once again, I would like to thank Puneet for giving so much tips, so much examples, and making this podcast more meaningful. So
Thank you so much.
Stay tuned for our next episode. Please do share your comments and thoughts with us. Also share your ideas to incorporate into our series and make the series more useful for the community. Till then, happy documentation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Sunita, for having me. It was great talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Puneet.